day. And yeah, I'm so excited to be joined again by Kelly McLaughlin. She is an individual giving coach, fantastic presenter about individual giving systems for the small shop. You're going to learn so many amazing things about how to actually build an individual giving program from the ground up. So this is ideal for those small startup organizations that are really trying to actually establish individual giving for the first time, or for those who are looking to grow their individual giving programs as well. So Kelly, it is fantastic to have you. Thank you
Hi,
for
Candace.
again.
Thanks for having me again.
How's your morning going so far?
Great. It's a beautiful day here. It's nice and cool. Took my dog for a walk. It's been a lovely morning. I've been sitting in on this all morning since like 9. It's been great.
Nice. Thanks for joining us. I'm glad to
Yeah.
have you. And just because we are doing our mixology class, just wondering, do you have a favorite cocktail or go-to drink?
Oh my goodness. You know what? I lived in Argentina for a while, so I have to say high quality Malbec. Malbec wine
Ooh,
would be my favorite.
that's a good one.
Can't beat
Yeah,
it. Can't
I
beat
do
it.
like a red.
There's my advertisement for Argentine wine. The best. Yeah.
So good. All right. Well, yeah, it's time. So thank you, Kelly, for joining us, and I'll let you
Awesome.
take it away.
Awesome. Candace, just a quick check. Poll. Are we able to do that poll?
Yeah, we can do the poll.
Awesome. All right. So I will just get started. I am Kelly, and just for clarity's sake, my preferred pronouns are she, her. And I am an individual giving coach and trainer. I work with nonprofits to build efficient, effective, and engaging individual giving programs, aiming to raise $500,000 to $1 million per year from individual donors. And I've got 12 years of fundraising experience in which I've grown different organizations. I've amplified results they were already seeing. I've built nonprofits fundraising structures from the ground up. I have started with startups. I have worked with organizations that have been around 40, 50 years. So I've seen the whole gambit, right? I'm also a former fitness trainer, and you might wonder why that's relevant, but I see individual giving a lot of the same way I see training to run a marathon. It's a huge undertaking, and you don't just get up and run, right? You have to take small incremental steps to get to the finish line. That's a photo of me on the slide. I also, just for cuteness sake, have a photo of my chief fuzzball officer. Her name is Cassiopeia. And she was recruited through Wolf Trap Animal Rescue just last month. So if you hear a little yapping, it's just because she is so excited to be on her first webinar as my CFO. So you can follow me, or more likely her, on my social media, and I'll share tons of fundraising tips and all of that during and after this presentation. So thanks so much for being here. I'm really excited to share with you all these tips. All right, so first I want to start by giving Candace so many props for putting this conference together. I think it's been so amazing. I've really enjoyed hearing from all the different presenters. But this, like a lot of conferences I've gone to over time, right? You get a million ideas. They're amazing ideas. You know they will work, but it's so hard to go about implementing them, right? If you're feeling that, I want you to know that I've got you. That's what this presentation is all about, is how are we going to take all of the incredible knowledge that you've gained over these 2 days and put them into a system that's going to work for your nonprofit, right? So I'm going to talk a lot less about the strategies and more how do you make it all work together. So Candace, if you're ready, I want to start with a quick poll just to see how everybody's feeling about their individual giving program. And so the first question is, how does your fundraising program feel? Does it feel highly organized, somewhat organized, kind of haphazard, or all over the place? How are we feeling about that?
Wow, a lot of responses. This is so
Woo!
good.
Yay.
We'll give it like a few more seconds here.
Awesome.
All right, we'll get to 40 seconds. I'll let it go. And 3, 2, 1.
Let's see.
And close it out.
All right.
Sharing results.
All right. Cool. So highly organized. Those 6 people. Well done, everyone. It looks like everyone else, there's room for improvement. Cool. That's how I think a lot of people feel. I'm glad to know it's not a majority that's all over the place. So that's awesome. All right. So then my second question is, do you think there's room to identify more efficient processes for your fundraising program? Yes or no?
Wow.
Look. All right. How's everybody feeling?
There we go. I think very quick responses on this one. This is good.
Awesome. Awesome.
All right. I'm going to give
it
a few more seconds.
Drum roll, please.
3, 2, 1. Get your responses in.
Love it.
Share results.
All right. Woo. All right. Awesome. So most of you feel like your program could be more efficient. Awesome. So that is a lot of what I do, is trying to find efficiencies within fundraising programs to make sure that you're operating as best as possible, right? So my system will help you organize all of the ideas you've had over this conference and hopefully put them into place so that you know that they can be achieved, that you can do everything that you've learned in this conference, right? And just to head this question off at the pass, every tool I'm showing you is available for purchase on my website. It's fitnonprofit.com/causebox. And if you use the coupon code DFS, you'll get 25% off the purchase price today and tomorrow for the conference, right? So just so you know, I know I always get those questions in the chat. Where am I supposed to go? That's where you can go. All right, so I hope everybody's pumped. How's everybody feeling? Let me know in the chat. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A. I'm gonna try and get to as many questions as I can before the end of the session. All right, awesome. So if you want a long-term sustainable individual giving program, you need to focus on donor engagement. And unfortunately, what I see most organizations focusing on is the solicitation. We ask and we ask and we ask. And that's not engagement. That's a one-sided relationship. That's barely even a relationship. It's talking at people, right? And eventually people get bored of being talked at, right? Like nobody wants to be treated like an ATM. And the thing that I have noticed over my time as a staff fundraiser and as a consultant is often nonprofits are doing a really great job with solicitations. What they're not doing a great job is how they're talking to donors in between solicitations. So most of the work that I do is actually changing how nonprofits relate to their donors when they aren't soliciting them, right? And often that's really where the magic is, right? So building a relationship with a prospect or a donor, I like to liken to finding a life partner, right? You don't start by proposing to that person, right? If you propose on the first date, people are going to run terrified, right? So you have to cultivate a relationship first. So here's my kind of wonky analogy, comparing donors to dating, right? Identification is kind of going out in the world, see who's out there. It's your speed dating sessions, right? You're going to meet a bunch of people and see if they jive with you. The second stage is cultivate. That's where you're building affinity, right? And that's the dating part. That's when you found somebody who's interesting and they're interested in you. And you're trying to figure out if you're going to be a good fit. Do you want the same things? Do you have the same goals, right? Because I think that's what people forget a lot is your donors have dreams. They want to change the world too. And so you're trying to figure out, do their dreams and goals and the change they want to see in the world pair with what your nonprofit is doing, right? Solicitation is the proposal. Don't start with it, right? Nobody who marries somebody they just met. And then steward, right, is the work you do after they've said yes. So just like marriage isn't the end of a relationship, it's the beginning of a new committed relationship. A donation isn't the end of your relationship with your donor. It's the beginning of a new, more engaged relationship. And I think we need to start treating it as such, right? And then upgrade is where you do it all over again, right? You lead to a different type of proposal, right? And I have no relationship analogy here. I keep working on something where it's maybe you get a dog together, or it's when you decide to have kids and it all falls apart. So so just forget about the upgrade part when you're thinking about my analogy. But if you build out a solid donor pipeline, everything else plugs into it. So every idea you've gotten in this conference fits in somewhere on this pipeline, right? And we just have to figure out how to make it work together. And so I promised you systems, not platitudes. So we're going to move away from that concept to something you can actually use in your day-to-day life. So this is a tool I've developed over the years. I call it my donor pipeline visualizer. And it helps you figure out exactly how your pipeline will work for different segments of your audience. So if you have an audience that you want to target, let's say people who follow you on social media, right? If you've been paying attention to Julia Campbell, I love her work, your social media folks, then you kind of build your pipeline forward from that identification point. By the same token, if you have a specific fundraising campaign in mind, or if you do an annual gala, something like that, you can build your pipeline backwards to the identification point and then forward from solicitation, right? And I will note that upgrade here can loop you back into solicitation, but it also doesn't have to get that complicated, right? You can build this up and build this up and build this up if you want, or you can just have 2 or 3 pipelines and keep it simple, right? But everything you've learned from this conference plugs in somewhere in this pipeline. So this is how you get all the ideas to work together. So all those awesome tips on like Google Ads from yesterday, that can plug into the identification phase, and you build out the pipeline of how you're going to engage those donors from there, right? Same with Julia and social media, right? You can kind of take that and put this into that strategy. And yesterday I was on the storytelling session that was super great. And all of those storytelling ideas, those can go in the cultivation and the stewardship phases, right? So it all works together, and it's not all these different ideas that you have to figure out where they go, right? We just plug them into this system. All right, so let's talk about finding your donors. Where are you going to find people, and how do you get them to raise their hand, right? There's been a lot of that in this conference. So I don't feel like I need to do the what here, right? We've got Google Ads that we've talked about. We've got social media. The panel discussion right before here was all about finding your audience, right? So I want to talk about how you incorporate all those different tactics so that those efforts don't end up as random actions, but part of a system that's driving this pipeline, right? So whatever method you use to identify, build out the rest of the pipeline from there. And the visualizer helps you by identifying tactics that you've learned in this conference and just keep stepping up that engagement. And I like to also think about, I don't want to just find random audiences, right? If I grab a megaphone, go out on a random street corner and start shouting about my mission to anybody who walks by, only a small subset of people are going to stop and want to talk to me, right? Maybe nobody will want to talk to me if I've got a megaphone, I'm not sure. But you're wasting a lot of time and energy out there. But if you are an organization providing arts education for low-income kids and you grab a megaphone and go stand outside, I don't know, I'm based in Washington, D.C., so go stand outside the Kennedy Center, right, and do your shouting, you're going to have a lot more people listen to you because there's already a natural affinity there, right? So that's one of the things I see nonprofits really doing ineffectually is they're kind of doing that random street corner shouting, and you need to start thinking about, where do audiences live that I want to talk to, and how do I find those people, right? And one of the things I highly recommend in doing that is building a donor persona. So this is a donor persona that I developed with one of my clients. They were here, they won, they were one of the 2 champions of the nonprofit performance showcase. Beat, they champion hip hop as a dynamic tool in improving physical and mental well-being for youth in under-resourced communities and for people with disabilities. And when I started working with them, I said, who's your ideal donor? And they said, anyone who loves hip hop, right? And I said, well, that could be why we're not landing a lot of donors, right? Because we need to make sure that we're targeting people and that we know who our donor are, right? And so we developed a donor persona and we named him Henry. And we made up a whole life for Henry. And so why did we do this? Because anyone who loves hip hop doesn't give you a lot to go on. That's a pretty diverse crowd of people, right? A lot of people love hip hop. So trying to write a compelling letter or even building a pipeline for anyone who loves hip hop, which is what they were trying to do previously, right? Meant that a lot of stuff was lackluster. It was too generic, all of that kind of stuff, right? Then we made up Henry, and everything we did after that got so much more compelling. It got so much more interesting. It got so much more targeted. We were able to figure out, okay, what platforms and what strategies are going to work to reach this ideal person, right? And so Henry was just the persona we came up with to reach people through social media campaigns. We developed different donor persona and marketing personas for other campaigns, and not just for donors, but for the parents of the kids that they ideally wanted to serve, all of that kind of stuff. We created those personas and we were able to get a lot more specific in our marketing and outreach. So really highly recommend in the identify phase, before you even start thinking about where you want to find your donors, that you start figuring out who your donors are and trying to get into their mindset so you can figure out where they are. All right, so on to step 2, and that is cultivate. So once you've found your audience, you need to figure out how to engage them. And there have been so many amazing ideas here in this conference. I'm not going to go into what to do, but how this all fits together. So once folks have gone through your initial identification process, how are you going to cultivate them? This is the dating part. This is getting to know them, right? Now, there's one thing I do see nonprofits doing a lot that I don't think is helpful. We talk about ourselves nonstop. It's we're so awesome, our mission, our impact, blah, 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 right? Us, me, me, me. And yes, your donors do need to get to know you, but remember, you're building a relationship. So are there ways that you can cultivate this relationship with your donors, or prospective donors as they are at this cultivate stage, in ways that create conversation and genuine interest? So I recommend you think about some visualizer, you use this visualizer tool to plan 2 to 3 steps, right? They don't have to be huge, just 3 things that can help develop the relationship. And I really advise something. I love doing open houses. I love having board members call people. I really like those types of things. Or in the era of Zoom, I've had a few nonprofits do these like Zoom impact meetings where they talk about what's been going on with the mission and let donors ask questions and that kind of thing. Especially a few of the nonprofits that I work with that have donors all over the country. It's been such a great tool that they've used over the past year to really talk to the donors and let donors talk back, right? And that's what we often miss, is how do we get those people to talk back to us, right? And so as you do your cultivation, think about a few steps. Some are you talking to them, the storytelling, right? Storytelling. But also, how are they going to talk back to you, and how do you build in that authentic feedback? And I don't mean forms and surveys and stuff. I mean having genuine conversations with people. Okay, and then solicit is our next phase. This is one, again, I really don't feel like I need to go into how you should solicit people. This conference has had a million ideas, and most nonprofits I go to have a million great ideas for soliciting donors. It's the rest of the pipeline that's not built out. So I'm assuming you have a lot of really awesome ideas. And what I'm saying is sometimes you have an awesome idea, but it's not part of this pipeline. And so you don't have the people that are ready to pay attention to the solicitation or this really fun fundraising idea, right? It's because we don't have the full pipeline built out. And so what you can do is you build into the solicitation, then you build out of it, right? And then when you loop them back into solicitation, they're listening because they've heard things other than, can I have some money, right? And so, just to give you an example, right? A lot of the questions I get, I often get people contacting me in mid to late October saying, Giving Tuesday is coming up and we want to fundraise it. You know, how do we get the most attention? And usually if I'm a week or 2 out from Giving Tuesday, I say, it's really late, we can try something, but you haven't had the time to build up your pipeline to that solicitation, right? But it's July right now. You all know better than that. You have time to build out a pipeline to Giving Tuesday. And Candace, being the rock star that she is, got the Giving Tuesday people here. They're going to come on soon and talk to you, so you'll really be ready for Giving Tuesday this year. But I think that's often what I tell people is you can't just come up with a fundraising idea. You have to build out this pipeline, because otherwise you're not going to leverage your solicitation as powerfully as you could if you built out a pipeline. So if you do have this solicitation idea, right, and like Giving Tuesday or your year-end campaign or some fun fundraising event, what you want to do is build your pipeline backwards from that solicitation point, back to the identification phase, and then forward, right? So I like to think about it this way. If I want to do something with Giving Tuesday, which is highly, digital, right? It's on social media. When I build back to the identification phase, who do I want paying attention to me going into Giving Tuesday? I'm going to be thinking about the people who are following me on social media, right? And so, my 95-year-old grandpa is not the person I'm trying to reach, right? He's pretty decent at Facebook, but that's not who I'm necessarily going to try to appeal to in the solicitation. That's not who I want to be talking to building up to it necessarily, right? So you build your pipeline backwards to the identify stage, knowing you want to get them to give to this solicitation. So what are we going to do in between to get them primed and pumped and ready to hit that donate button on Giving Tuesday, right? And the thing about Giving Tuesday is it creates a wonderful opportunity, right? But you need to lay the groundwork, ideally before a week or two before. And that applies to your year-end campaign or spring fundraising gala, anything like that. Random people just won't find you and decide that they love you so much they want to give, right? I think that's what we would love to have happen, but it's not often what happens, right? So think about the current solicitations you're doing, your annual gala, a fun run, year end, whatever that is. Build this pipeline backwards from it so that you're talking to your donors without asking for a while. And then they'll be much more receptive to you when you come around with that solicitation. And again, I'm not telling you what to do or not to do in the solicitation phase. As I've said at the top, often when I come in and work on fundraising programs, I'm often not changing the solicitation. Usually the solicitations are really good ideas. It's the rest of the pipeline that needs to get built out. All right, so moving right along, you solicited, your donor said yes. And so now what are we gonna do, right? We're gonna deepen that relationship. And this is where I see a lot of organizations lose their donors. The donor gives, the nonprofit sends an autoresponder, and then the nonprofit folks pat themselves on the back. We did it, we hit our goal, whatever. And then the next year we're befuddled why the donors didn't come back, right? And that's because we didn't talk to them after we got the gift, right? And so what we need to do is deepen the relationship, and build it and do more talking to them without asking, right? I have worked with donate organizations and I've gotten their donor retention stats up to 70 and 80%. And I don't do it by asking more. I do it by thinking better. Okay. And so getting the second ask starts the moment they make the first gift, right? And you build your pipeline out. At a minimum, I like to do like 3 stewardship contact points for every solicitation before I think about upgrading them. And how do I do that? Here's another tool that I've got for you. If you really want to take your donor retention, to the next level, I've got another tool for you. And that is my thank you and gratitude process template. The idea here is that you have 2 processes that activate after you receive a gift. First, immediately after you receive the gift, you want to activate the thank you process, right? And then the giving, what actions you take might vary based on how much the gift is, but I recommend, especially for bigger gifts, like 3 touches. I like to send every donor at least a personal email. One of the great things I like to do is make sure that I am copied on any notification about a donation, like the autoresponder also comes to me as well as the donor, so that I can reply to the donor and say, hey, I just saw this gift come in. Thank you so much, right? It doesn't add that much time. And if you were at Jeremy's presentation, right, you can have a template that does it for you. Or just copy and paste it. I used to just keep it on a digital sticky note on my computer, right? And copy and paste it whenever that happens. It doesn't take a lot of time, but the donor reads that as such a personal touch, right? So adding a touch like that, that alone, oh, Jeremy's here, yay! And so that just adding that personal touch can help so much beyond an autoresponder, right? And so lower level donors, sometimes that's all I will add, but it makes a huge difference. And I have had so many donors over the years respond to when I reach out to them to say, hey, thanks for saying thank you. Or, hey, I had a question about this campaign. What's the goal? Or why are you doing that? And it starts a conversation with the donor that I wouldn't have started if all they got was the autoresponder, right? And then as you get to higher levels, I really suggest phone calls. Call your donors, call your donors, call your donors. If you've ever seen me do a webinar, at some point I say call your donors. So here it is, call your donors. When you call and say thank you, whether you leave a voicemail or ideally they answer the phone, you can start building a relationship that is so much more meaningful to that donor. They're going to remember that you called, because a lot of people give to a lot of nonprofits and all they get is the autoresponder. So you can stand out by calling and saying thank you. And what I used to do was just every Friday before I left the office, I would allocate an hour or two on a Friday afternoon to thank everybody who donated since the prior Friday, right? And sometimes it was 2 phone calls and sometimes it was 15, right? But let me tell you, ending the week on a Friday, just calling all your donors, saying thank you, hearing them tell you what a great job your organization is doing, right? There's nothing like it for a great lift before you get into the weekend. So call your donors, right? And then the gratitude process is the second half of this. So it's something that runs throughout the year. And this is for folks who have donated, right? You can come up with other things that are going to cultivate them. I mean, storytelling, there, again, so many great ideas in this conference, right? But you want to do things to keep people engaged. Some of the things I've done that work really, really well, impact reports. And Candace and I ran a webinar on the impact reports recently, so you can watch that. Quarterly email updates, conference calls, Zoom meetings to talk about impact, right? These are things you can do at scale with 10 donors or 100 donors, right? But it keeps people engaged and it keeps them feeling like you actually care about them personally and want them involved, right? So once you figure out what those steps are that you want to take, you can actually map them out onto an annual plan, right? So once you've decided on what you're going to offer at which donation level for the process, right, you can timeline it out across the year. And so this is actually a second spreadsheet within that template. And I want to talk about the benefits here, right? A lot of times when I say, what are your donor benefits? People say t-shirts, keychains, other, tchotchkes, right? And that's not what I'm talking about, right? Nathan from Next After talked about this yesterday. And I loved what he said about, when you start offering people stuff, they stop thinking about giving to others and they start thinking about themselves. And that's not what we want to do. That's not what we want to trigger. The benefits I'm talking about here really build up efficient reporting systems, right? So we can tell stories. We keep the donor connected to our mission and to the people that we serve. My absolute favorite thing to do is an annual impact meeting. If you're able to do an open house, get your donors together, thank them, let them see your space, talk about the work you've done. That's something I absolutely love doing with nonprofits is engaging donors that way, right? But then you can do less time-intensive things, right? Just writing a letter that's a quarterly impact report and having board members call to say thank you to donors. Those aren't time-intensive, but they can be really high impact for your donors. All right, so we've gotten this far in the pipeline, and I know what you're thinking. This is great, but all these different activities are scattered throughout the year. Maybe I'm running a solicitation here and there and all of that kind of stuff, right? So the donor pipeline visualizer I like to use to think, here's a segment that I'm trying to reach, and here's how I'm going to engage this donor, right? Here's another segment, and here's how I'm going to engage those donors. But then I have another tool, it's the Donor Engagement Planner, and that allows you to take all of those audience segments, to take the pipeline and to map it out across the year to see where and how you're going to get it all done, right? Because I know that's my biggest problem as a fundraiser, right? Is how do you get it all done? There are a million things to do, right? Once you centralize everything into this, you can actually see how your whole year fits together. And what I love about this tool is that it helps me to spot when I might be taking on too much, right? So hopefully some of you attended my burnout session yesterday. Being able to spot when your fundraising or marketing program is taking on too much in a given month, that will help reduce your stress and lower your chances of burnout like astronomically, right? So in this example, right, that I've got here, I'm starting to get a pileup in March. So I may want to think about moving some things forward because, gee, July looks pretty empty, August looks pretty empty. So if you're just getting started, this can again be really, really simple. But it also these planners, you can just keep adding and adding, and they can get more complicated as you go. But this structure can help keep everything organized. So last, I want to touch very briefly on what upgrades can look like and what that is in the pipeline funnel. The first one is major gifts, right? Major gifts is its own beast, right? And you can take different courses on major gifts. But at the same time, you just build it into a pipeline just like everything else, right? And I have this major gifts toolkit that is also on my website. You can check out. It helps. You can identify people in your database, right? So the pipeline doesn't just work with new donors that you're going to identify outside of the organization. You can build a pipeline for current donors who you want to turn into major donors. So in this case, the identify might be going through your donor base and seeing who might be primed and ready to make a major gift. Maybe somebody who's given over $200, $500, depending on what your major gift cutoff is going to be for the past couple of years. And how are you going to cultivate them towards a major gift ask, right? The pipeline still applies even when you're talking about major gifts. The main difference is that when you're talking major gifts, you're going to want to do the cultivation and the stewardship at a much more individualized and intimate level, right? So this is where you want to create as many in-person or one-on-one small group opportunities as possible, like open houses, impact meetings. I've been doing virtual coffees with people, which has been really fun over the pandemic, right? It's worked out great. I've not done this with any organizations, but I've heard of one that they were like door dashing coffee or breakfast or lunch, whatever meeting to the donor they were meeting with, which I think is really a great idea, right? And I also have an anatomy of an ask workbook on my website that can help you kind of map out your ask. And then similarly, to major gifts, monthly giving. You can build a pipeline for monthly giving, right? I really, really recommend this book by Erica Wasdorp, which is Monthly Giving Made Easy. She is such a great monthly giving guru. Everything I've learned from her webinars and her books. But again, here you build it into the pipeline. At the identify phase, who would be most likely to give a monthly gift? What I tend to look for with my clients is someone who already gives more frequently than annually. So often I'll do a database poll for anyone who has given 3 times in a 2-year span, right? It's that simple. And then cultivate, what are we going to do to deepen the relationship to make them feel like giving regularly is something they might want to do, convince them that that's worthwhile. And then the solicitation, you have, again, so many options here. Mail and email are kind of my go-to, but again, that's Erica's book can help you answer those questions. And then stewardship, this is the one with monthly giving. Don't forget to steward your monthly donors. The set it and forget it mentality is for them, not for you, right? Keep reporting back to them and remind them that they matter, because you can upgrade your monthly donors, right? You can get them more engaged and get them to give more monthly, right? And so that's really high impact option. And then the last way I like to upgrade donors, and particularly I like to think of peer-to-peer as an option to upgrade my donors who can't personally give more, is by engaging them in peer-to-peer fundraising. And peer-to-peer engages your current donors that want to do more but can't necessarily give you more dollars, right? And here again, Candace and I have done many a webinar and course on peer-to-peer together. So, and of course, CauseVox, you're on a CauseVox conference. CauseVox has all of the resources on how to run a great peer-to-peer campaign. But again, I love peer-to-peer because it works your pipeline so well. A lot of people like the identify phase. When you do peer-to-peer, your donors are identifying new donors for you. It's their community, right? And the cultivate stage, they do all the cultivate work for you, because by talking to their friends about your mission, they are doing that cultivating for you. So people will believe their friends over you any day. So it gets so much easier when you activate your community through peer-to-peer. So really the work that you have to do, you're getting your community to identify, cultivate and solicit these people into your donor base. And then you just have to knock it out of the park with the stewarding of those donors, right? And so I like to think of peer-to-peer as an option to upgrade people who, you know, maybe there's that donor, right, that they can't give you more than $50 a year, but you know, they can activate their community. And if they can get 5 friends to give you $50 a year, that's so valuable, right? So I tend to think about peer-to-peer as a way to upgrade my not upgradable donors. So I will take some questions in just a minute if Candace tells me there's enough time. But as I have been pointing to, tools and templates, this is on my website. Everything that I have talked about in this session, except for major gifts and peer-to-peer, is in this templates to get your systems in place bundle. And you can get 25% off of that on my website. And then also, if you need extra support, I offer one-on-one options. I do individual giving game plan. It's an 8-week one-on-one intensive program where I work with just your organization to analyze where your operation is, make choices about your best opportunities, set goals, build that pipeline, build those donor personas. I will walk you through all of this. And that is my 8-week individual giving game plan program. I do one-on-one coaching, and then I also do custom trainings just like this. So my most popular one is board fundraising. So if you need help getting your board excited about fundraising, I have a great training session that usually means the organization walks away with an actionable list of donor prospects that they can start their board cultivating immediately after the training. So if you're interested in any of that, you can go to fitnonprofit.com/CauseVox, and I am offering a free consultation to anybody who attends the Digital Fundraising Summit. And that's all I've got. So yay, I think we've got some time for questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kelly. This was so great, so clear, and like very actionable. I think this does give us a great frame to really look at when we want to, create that donor pipeline and create that individual giving program. So thank you so much for all these great insights. Always a pleasure, Kelly. This is so good. There's a lot of really good questions, so I want to get to as many as possible.
Awesome.
And I thought this one feels very on brand for the Digital Fundraising Summit. Fundraising seems like a full-time job in itself. What is your advice for a small nonprofit who doesn't have an appointed full-time person solely dedicated to fundraising? How would you recommend building and maintaining close relationships with donors if you aren't able to be 100% dedicated to the cause due to other work commitments?
Yes. So fundraising absolutely can be its own full-time job. There are organizations that have 5, 6, 80. I've heard of an organization that has 80 full-time fundraisers, right? Those are huge organizations, right? But yeah, I mean, so it can be, but so many nonprofits are, and a lot of the clients that I work with are small nonprofits that are board run, so nobody full-time even works for the organization, or it's a small staff. All of my clients are under 5 staff members, right? And so none of my clients have a full-time fundraiser. So really it's about creating that efficiency and figuring out how do we take actions that feel very individualized for the donor, but don't take a lot of time for us. So that's where, again, I love impact meetings. I will talk about impact meetings all day long. But that's where, I can do a virtual thing or an in-person thing or a hybrid thing, because that's becoming more and more popular right now. But finding opportunities like that where I can do something where I'm talking to my donors and it feels very intimate and gives them an opportunity to ask you questions and all of that kind of stuff, but that doesn't take a whole ton of time for you, right? So an impact meeting, often what I'll do is, I send an invitation out. I have people RSVP using like Evite or something like that, right? There's just an automated way that they, or a Google form, right? And then I send them the Zoom link or the call-in link or whatever, right? And then I just talk to the donors, right? And so there's a little bit of prep involved, but not a ton, right? And so that's a really great way to talk to your donors. Site visits are great if you have a site. And then, like I said, thank you calls, just calling them as soon as they give is just, it's such a wonderful way to do it. And that doesn't take a ton of time, right? Because even leaving a voicemail, I'm not saying like call till you talk to the person, leave a voicemail, just call once. And I've seen that just exponentially increase donor retention just by calling donors to say thank you, right?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Kelly. Great tips. Really helpful for the small shop. Jess asked, what's the best platform or one you recommend to use for email series for auto send welcomes and storytelling?
I tend to recommend MailChimp, just because I feel like MailChimp is so easy to use. They have pretty affordable. You can't do automated series on their free plan, but I think it's like 14, 15. They keep changing their pricing. It's not that expensive, and I think what you get out of it is pretty substantial. So I tend to use MailChimp. I know other people like other platforms, but I've only ever really used MailChimp for that.
Yeah, okay, great. And then there's another question about donor mapping programs. Have you used that? Do you have any programs you recommend?
Donor mapping.
Like Miro, they mentioned.
Miro. Oh yeah. I mean, I use my templates. So that's what I use. I tend to find that works pretty well. It's just a spreadsheet. But if you're more of a visual person, if you like the arrows and all of that kind of stuff, I have used Miro to do like strategic planning, mapping, and that kind of thing. It does work pretty well. I have also used Trello to kind of map out things if I want to be able to move them around really easily. But yeah, most of the time I'm using my templates. So it's not meant to be a commercial plug or anything, but that's most of the time what I'm using with my clients.
Thanks so much, Kelly. And so someone asked, I think earlier you mentioned, getting your audience primed to give on Giving Tuesday. So just, I guess after, like, let's say you're stewarding that donor along the pipeline, what kind of time frames do you think people need in order to give again? Or what is like a timeline that you recommend?
Yeah, I like to start, I mean, almost any campaign, I try and start at least 2 weeks in advance, right? Like with really deliberate cultivation and that kind of thing. But the more time you have, the better. So 4 to 6 weeks would be my ideal to really make sure you're consistently messaging to people that you have time to get their attention. And then a little bit depends on what you're doing, right? So the different things that you're doing, different strategies require different timelines. But one of the things I always talk about is if you plan to run a year-end campaign, you should be doing the prep work in October. to start making sure your donors are ready to give for year end, right? And a lot of the time I get people coming to me in late October to say, hey, let's plan our year end fundraising, right? And I can still do it for you, right? If you come to me in October. But it's a lot more effective if you actually have it planned by October so you can start laying the groundwork before Thanksgiving, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. I think we have time for maybe one more question. And I saw this one come in. It says, such a great point about upgrading a donor to a peer-to-peer fundraiser. Do you have any suggestions on how to keep them as a donor beyond that, and or yearly peer-to-peer fundraisers? So kind of like retaining those peer-to-peer donors.
Yeah. That's your stewardship strategy, right? Is so when I run a peer-to-peer campaign, I have a strategy to steward the people who fundraised for the organization, and I have a strategy for people who just donated, right? Again, the basis is often phone calls to say thank you for all your donors. But that's often what I do is I'll call and I'll congratulate my top performers and say, hey, thank you so much. Do you have tips that I can use next year to help other people do better and all of that kind of stuff? When you make people feel successful and like they really contributed to your mission, that makes a huge difference. So that's having a really solid stewardship plan before the event, because often what I see is we plan to the solicitation point and then we forget about everything after that, right? And so having a stewardship plan before you run your peer-to-peer fundraiser that activates the day after. I often say as a fundraiser, if I have a fundraising event, my deadline for everything, I plan out the 2 weeks after that is when I'm doing all the stewardship work, right? So for everybody else at my nonprofit, the gala was on, October 6th, but the gala didn't end for me till the end of October because I was doing all the stewardship from the gala, right? For the peer-to-peer that I used to run, it was a polar bear plunge in January, right? The event ended in mid-January for everybody else. For me, it ended in mid-February because I was doing all of that follow-up work to make sure that everybody did it again next year, right? And that's how we kept growing the peer-to-peer fundraiser.
Yeah, and if you're interested in more on peer-to-peer fundraising, Kelly's done a couple of really fantastic webinars with us. I'll try to find them and paste them in the chat as well. There's one on creating a toolkit to empower your peer-to-peer fundraisers to succeed. And there's one just like peer-to-peer fundraising basics. So we have like a few different resources that we can follow up with that are completely free just to watch and learn more from Kelly, who is truly a delight to have every time here. Thank you, Kelly, for also being a sponsor and being part of sharing and spreading the word about the summit. It is truly a delight to have you. So
thanks for having me, Candace. This has been great.
Awesome. Well, hopefully I'll see you online later if you're able to
Yes,
pop into some of the other sessions.
absolutely.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks again, Kelly.